This iconic painting of Jesus needed to be restored after centuries of wear and tear. This is the result. You may have heard of this story. It's one of the biggest failures in painting history. Today, we're taking a look at the top 15 biggest painting fails of all time. Number 15. Lucian Freud's Queen. Queen Elizabeth is the most photographed person in the world, having been coronated in 1952 and playing a prominent role ever since. Despite how familiar her appearance is, this doesn't mean every portrait of her has exactly turned out lifelike. And surprisingly, a well-known artist, Lucian Freud, created something quite bizarre in 2001. Unlike previous portrait artists, he wasn't initially asked to paint Her Majesty, but instead volunteered for the honor. And if the final result was anything to go by, she probably regretted accepting his request. There's a theory in the art world that every painter, when doing a portrait, bases the image on themselves, and it's no more clear than in Freud's image of the Queen. She has the same eyebrows as he, painted on his own self-portrait, his eyes, and also a very similar chin to his own. Is this actually an image of the Queen or Freud's alter ego if he had dressed up as the Queen? What do you think? Number 14. Restoration of Chinese frescoes. With so many highly regarded ancient artworks around the world, custodians of the priceless artifacts are left with the responsibility of preserving them for future generations, which can prove to be tricky when the material used to create them in the first place begin to fade away. The 270-year-old Yunkai Temple in Chaoyang, China, which is just to the northeast of Beijing, is full of frescoes from the Qing dynasty. But when they started to fall into a state of disrepair, the controversial decision was made to return them to their former glory. The problem was the techniques used to paint them in the first place have long been forgotten, so the artist that was chosen instead used modern methods, which left the frescoes looking like bright-colored cartoon images. When people first saw the restoration work in 2013, there was an outcry because of how the artworks had been ruined, and it led to a series of firings and punishments for the officials who oversaw it. Number 13. Bush paints Putin. Once you've finished your term as President of America, there's very little that's left on your bucket list of achievements in life. But that didn't stop George W. Bush, who, after leaving the White House, took up the hobby of painting and began to create portraits of military veterans and world leaders. It's probably a great thing that these were never released while he was in office, especially the one he did of Vladimir Putin, which undoubtedly had similarities with the Russian leader. You can certainly see who it's meant to be, but you can't help but wonder if something's missing. Would this portrait have been hung in a gallery if it had been done by anyone else but a former president who has his own library to display his works in? Or is this a genius artwork that shows W's tender side and the cold-hearted nature he detected in the other world leaders he had to deal with? Number 12. El Tío Paquete. Francisco Goya was a Spanish painter who's considered by most art historians to be one of the most important of the century's artists in late 18th and early 19th centuries, and is often said to be one of the greatest portraitists who ever lived. He was a leading figure in Romantic art and produced hundreds of stunning works during his time, being known for his scathing political commentary that was hidden within the paint. Not all of his attempts were masterpieces, however, and there's one in particular that's had critics and art lovers divided ever since it was first exhibited. Known as the El Tío Paquete, which is the name of the subject of the portrait, it at first seems like a competent representation of who Goya described on the back as a famous local blind man and lived behind the church of San Felipe el Real. The way in which it was painted betrays Goya's personal opinion of the man. It's almost crude in its nature, and the coarse brushstrokes show a lack of care in the finished piece that isn't present in his other works. Some think it's a great example of his latter works, but many think it's proof that no matter how good you are at something, you occasionally take your eye off the ball. Number 11. Virgin Mary Sculpture. Churches across Europe are full of ancient artworks and sculptures that have certainly seen better days. But in an example of why they're best left as they are, a volunteer from the town of Ranadorio took things into their own hands and completely lost the beauty and subtlety of the original. The wooden sculptures of the Virgin and the Child and St. Anne were thought to have been carved in the 15th century and had long been a focal point in the town's chapel. They had lost their shine over the years, though, and just after the turn of the century they were restored to how they would have originally looked. 15 years later, however, a resident managed to get permission from the priest to update the statues, and the results were horrifying. Instead of keeping the lovely wooden coloration or faded original paint, the tobacco shop owner completely painted over the statues with bright colors and was very proud of her work. Other locals were less enthused, however, and scans are now underway to assess the extent of the damage and see if there's any chance they can be reverted to how they were before. Number 10. Keep clear. When you visit different countries and feel brave enough to drive on the roads, you'll soon have to get used to new signs, rules, and etiquette. But there's one thing you'd normally expect. If the words are painted on the road, they'll at least be readable in the local language. This isn't always the case, however, and in the UK it appears as if the people responsible for writing instruction or warnings may occasionally have issues with spelling or forget to check how something should look before putting paint to tarmac. There are endless examples of these, but the main words that seem to cause issues are keep clear, bus stop, and school. Sometimes it can be hard enough to navigate tricky stretches of road, but with signs like these, what hope have you got? Number 9. The VW Polo Harlequin. Owning a car is virtually a rite of passage among young adults around the world. Do you go for the fastest, the one with the best sound system, just anything you can get your hands on, or the one that looks the coolest? We all have our own different measures of what makes for the perfect ride, but one of the things most people are in agreement on is the importance of its color. Usually when you buy a car, it'll be one main color, and while there are plenty of examples of people who have paintings applied to them that have turned out less than perfect, the biggest paint job fail for a car has got to be the VW Polo Harlequin, which amazingly was actually sold to customers like this by the manufacturer. Sure, it helps those people who find it difficult to make a choice to overcome their uncertainty by offering a car in 4 different colors at the same time, but it's a ghastly design decision. Somewhat comically, you never knew which part would be which color, because while you could specify the color of the roof, everything else was pot luck. It's almost as if they had a series of cars that were the usual single color, pulled them apart, and rebuilt them with no thought of how they'd look. Amazingly, VW actually sold 3,800 of these monstrosities, which shows you truly can't account for taste in this world. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. The Restoration of Jesus. As one of the most important people in the Christian faith, Jesus is depicted on countless frescoes, statues, paintings, and images around the world. Many churches have artworks dating back hundreds of years that have become important artifacts. It's no surprise that every effort is made to maintain their glory as much as possible. But sometimes an image may fall into such a state of disrepair that there's no choice but to ask a restorer to undertake significant work to make them like new again. In most cases, the process is professionally done and the results are incredible. But sometimes things don't go exactly to plan. Possibly the best example of this was a 100-year-old fresco called Ese Homo, which was painted by Elias Garcia Martinez and hung in the Santuario de Misericordia Church in Biorra, Spain. An 80-year-old local woman saw that the paint had begun to peel off, so in full sight of the parishioners and priests, began restoration works over a period of a few days. While she may have well matched the color of the tunic almost perfectly, she didn't exactly get the face or the hair quite right. And the church was then left with the question of whether it was worth paying a vast amount to undo the damage she had done for what is essentially a worthless painting, but one that has local sentimental importance. Number 7. Copied tattoo. Tattoos are often a way for people to assert their independence and give a chance to have a unique piece of artwork or message inscribed onto your skin. But while many people understand the importance of working with a talented artist to create a bespoke design that'll look awesome, others will choose to take the quick route, and this doesn't always work out so well. This is exactly what happened when one man commissioned his favorite artist to design a piece that would be put on his chest, and when the finished tattoo was complete, he proudly shared images of it online. Someone somewhere loved it so much that he took the image to his local tattoo parlor and asked for a copy of it for himself. The problem, though, is that he had placed it on a different part of his body by a less capable artist. So the first thing you'll notice is how poor the recreation actually is. And the second thing you'll suddenly see is that instead of noting where the original tattoo had been placed, he thought the man's nipple was a part of the design, so included it in the recreation too. Number 6. The Unfortunate Otter. 2020 has offered everyone the chance to take up new hobbies or revisit ones they had previously been forced to give up on because of the lack of time, and in a lot of cases, this has been massively beneficial. Some people are actively changing their lives because of it, such as being able to begin a career as an artist. But there's one person who should stick to the day job because even though they clearly put a lot of work into their paintings, they're not quite ready to begin exhibiting just yet. This image, as you've probably guessed by now, is meant to be a dead otter floating in a river next to a fish that's wearing sunglasses. Made with watercolors, they've blended the blue of the river well and have certainly captured the essence of the focal creature. But you have to wonder what happened to inspire this image in the first place, and why the artist seems to have felt the need to use the remains of the otter as the paintbrush. Number 5. The Ugly House in Naples. We've all had an annoying neighbor, whether it's someone who makes too much noise, doesn't put their trash bins away, or always takes your favorite parking spot. But luckily, most residents are in at least agreement that the overall look of the street is important, and don't do anything too crazy with the way the outside of their house looks. Of course, sometimes this unwritten social code isn't always adhered to, and residents in a small gated community in Il Regalo, which is towards the northern part of Naples, Italy, were in for a shock when a family dispute led to a somewhat unusual exterior decor for a $500,000 home on their street. Apparently, the result of a falling out between a father and son who had jointly purchased it, they began covering it in various shades of paint, and this didn't solely focus on the house itself. They also painted in the plants, bushes, trees, and the mailbox. The most frustrating thing for neighbors was that there wasn't anything they could do about it. Eventually, the owner vacated the property, but because there was a legal dispute over when it should be sold, no work to remedy the situation could be undertaken. Number 4. The Sistine Chapel restoration. Completed in around 1481 after being created and built by Pope Sixtus IV, the Sistine Chapel is undoubtedly one of the most famous religious structures in the entire world, mainly because of the paintings on the walls that were done by renowned Renaissance artists, and the ceiling which was painted by Michelangelo between 1508 and 1512. Of course, when creating works like these, very little thought was put into how they would look 500 years later. After all, they probably thought the buildings would be long gone by now, and as a result, the paint has begun to flake and peel away. There have therefore been a number of restorations to keep them looking as perfect as possible, but these themselves have resulted in several painting fails. While none have destroyed any of the priceless works, and to most casual observers nothing looks out of place, they definitely look very different from when the images were first applied to the ceiling. The most unusual result is, although the colors are now more vivid than they have been for quite some time, most people's eyes have been painted over, and their pupils haven't been reapplied, so it looks as if everyone has been depicted with their eyes shut, when in fact they were definitely open when they were first designed. Number 3. The Angry Dog. The Norwegian painter Edvard Munch is responsible for one of the most recognizable paintings in the world, The Scream. He created 4 versions, 2 in pastel and 2 in paint, and in 2012 the second pastel version sold at auction for an astonishing $119 million. There's a reason why certain artworks by artists take prominence over others though, because the truth is not everything they create is to the quality we have come to expect from visiting museums and having high-resolution images on the internet to search through. Munch was known for taking inspiration from a wide range of methods and subjects, but you can imagine anyone paying as much or even a fraction of the amount paid for The Scream for this painting of his called The Angry Dog. This is actually a representation of a real dog called Raleigh, who had a terrible owner before being adopted by one of Munch's neighbors, and the artist clearly had a fraught relationship with the canine. Some see it as a comedic insult towards a rival, and others see it as his worst work. Do you think it has any value? Number 2. Hitler's art. Perhaps it's the peace and tranquility you feel when you put paint to paper, but it's surprising how many world leaders throughout history have seen painting as a way to express their creativity. It's still surprising, though, to know that one of the 20th century's most evil people, Adolf Hitler, was a keen artist, intended to focus on landscapes. The paintings, though, were quite unremarkable, and no one would pay any attention to them if they hadn't been made by such a reviled figure. Still, in 2019, a German auction house thought there'd be enough interest that they put 5 of his works up for sale. But it turns out, even with the macabre novelty value they thought the images would attract, they remain unsold. It seems even modern right-wing fascists have some sense of taste in art, even if they are lacking most other basic human emotions. Number 1. Restoring the Immaculate Conception. Spanish Baroque artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo created a number of significant religious works during his career, but it was the Immaculate Conception of Los Venerables that would become known as one of his most famous. Fortunately, the original is kept very safe in a Spanish museum and is only ever touched by experts in the field. The artist and his students created several copies of the piece, and these themselves command a significant price too. The owner of one enlisted the help of a furniture restorer to breathe some life back into it at a cost of $1,350. And if you're thinking that's quite cheap to restore a classical artwork, then you're right. The artist chosen for the job took 2 attempts at making improvements, and as you can see, all they really did was turn the Virgin Mary into an unrecognizable blob, with no sign of the subtlety and tenderness of the original. If there's a lesson to learn from this, it's that when your masterpieces need a touch-up, make sure you pay that bit extra to get someone who actually knows what they're doing. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.